Welcome to Grant's Rock Warehouse and to another edition of This is Power Pop. DC Toontime is here with me, and we are going to take a look at the 70s band Artful Dodger. So we're looking at those 4 albums. Is it something you might need in your collection? Well, you'll soon find out.
Grant is changing the world one track at a time on Grant's Rock Warehouse.
Welcome to Grant's Rock Warehouse, and welcome to another episode of This is Power Pop. Exactly. We haven't done one of these in a long time. I want to welcome DC Toontime here tonight. We are going to talk about the band Artful Dodger. They put out 4 records between 1975 and 1980. They were formed in Fairfax, Virginia back in 1973. Put records out on Columbia. They virtually were ignored. The 70s, we didn't care so much about that. Think about this. First Cheap Trick album came out in the mid-70s. No one really cared about that. They didn't really have any success until Dream Police, 1979. Artful Dodger, contemporaries of Cheap Trick, didn't really have any success. Big Star, who was prior to Artful Dodger, no success there either. We're going to look at this band and see how they stack up. My co-host tonight, DC Toontime. Seen DC? We've been talking Grand Funk for a long time.
We have, and now we're kind of segueing here into the power pop realm.
We are.
And especially since my roots are those of Northeast Ohio, and Artful Dodger was huge in Northeast Ohio. For a band from Fairfax, Virginia, how in the world did they gain such a following in Northeast Ohio? And it was rabid, folks, not just kind of, we kind of like these guys. And I've tried to formulate a reason why Artful Dodger was so popular in Northeast Ohio. And I've come to the conclusion that Northeast Ohio is kind of a hub of power pop. This is the home of the Raspberries. And there were comparisons to Artful Dodger with the Raspberries, which I can hear. And I think Artful Dodger is a grittier Raspberries. Or if the Raspberries and Rod Stewart and Faces had a baby, it would be Artful Dodger.
This is the other thing that I hear. We're going to get to it, but I can't help. You mentioned that Rod Stewart. I think Ian Lloyd from Stories.
Oh, Stories? My God, yeah.
Ian Lloyd, who did a lot of background vocals on the Foreigner stuff, buddies with Nick Jones. Ian Lloyd, definitely hear Ian Lloyd. I hear, what else there? Steve Marriott.
Oh, my God, yes.
To God, if you think about early, you think about early Small Faces or that, where I'm not talking Huggable Pie. I'm talking Small Faces.
Exactly.
Steve. I hear a lot of that in here. So you're right.
Oh, and definitely there is a connection there. The lead singer was a guy named Billy Palicelli. Nice Italian boy. His vocal stylings was right in the pocket of a Rod Stewart, or like you say, Small Faces era, Steve Marriott, Ian Lloyd with Stories. And that's where I get this kind of gritty Raspberries feel. They also had another guy that would sing occasional lead vocals. I think his name's Billy Cox. Wrote some of the songs. And it's a nice little change up. But most of the songs Palicelli sings. But a couple songs on each album. I think his name's Billy Cox. Takes over the vocals, and it's a nice change of pace.
Yeah, it's fine. It works.
But here we are in 1973 with Artful Dodger. And like I said, they just couldn't gain any momentum. These albums, and Grant and I were just talking a bit before we started recording this show, all 4 of these albums are tremendous. I have a few I favor more than the others, just by a bit. But every album's got gems on it and songs that you sit there and think, at the time, why weren't they hits? And a lot of these tunes were released as singles. They just could not get any ground. They couldn't make any headway, except for the area I grew up in. Northeast Ohio, Cleveland, down through Akron and Youngstown. This band always drew a great crowd, and they did sell a decent amount of albums in the area. So there's no explanation for that. And you're not going to make a career or a productive career just having a regional success. And I don't know if there were any other pockets of the country. I'm assuming in their hometown they were pretty popular, but they just could not get a national audience. Oddly enough, their fourth album, one of the singles, charted in Australia. So go figure.
And that fourth album was on a weird label.
Yeah, let me get that name.
They were off Columbia by that time.
Yeah.
Columbia said, all right, the third album didn't do anything.
3-album deal, Grant. You know how that goes.
See it, 3-album deal, normal in the 70s.
Now, I don't know. I'm going to try and pronounce this label that they signed on for their last album. It spells out Areola America Recordings or Records. But anyway.
I did a little bit of research. You know,
Yes.
Rave On, we're talking about the album Rave On 1980.
Mhm.
It really did get a CD or a CDR release.
Oh, it did.
The band played the Agora in Cleveland, and they were evidently it was through the band that you could get the CD or the
Oh,
CDR
okay.
of it. So it's never been reissued because, oh, by the way, since we're talking about it, can you throw up that comp that you just
I
showed?
sure can. This has got all the Columbia, the 3 Columbia album releases on CD.
And it sounds great. It's two CD set.
Yes,
I
sir.
think it's out of print now. If you can check it out, if you like what we're talking about on this show, check it out. I'm sure you can get one used. But yeah, Rave On did get quote unquote a CD release.
That's news to me because I had checked and it said in the information I had, it never got a CD release. But if you went through the band, you could have got it for a period of time.
That's it.
Every one of their reunions, they played Cleveland. So I'm not bullshitting you, folks. And this band was huge in that Northeast Ohio. Like I say, when they came back for reunions in 91, 2005, where did they play? The Cleveland Agora.
Well, you know,
So-
Cleveland was a hotbed. Todd Rundgren.
They loved Todd in
loved Todd
Cleveland.
Cleveland. Of course, you had the
And-
Raspberries. They were big.
You had Blue Ash in Youngstown.
Michael Stanley Band.
Michael Stanley, who's not power pop, but
No.
very catchy content on those Michael Stanley Band albums. But I mean, in the power pop realm, Northeast Ohio was a mini hotbed for that movement. And I know in Los Angeles there was a pretty strong power pop movement there, but Northeast Ohio's got nothing to be ashamed about. There were lots of very good bands that came out of there in that genre.
Now, we were talking earlier, Artful Dodger here. I'm in Central Ohio. They didn't get any traction here. Michael Stanley Band did get some traction here in Columbus. But Artful Dodger, nothing. So we're going to look at these 3 albums. And like I said, this is a power pop band. When I look at this first album, well, actually, go ahead. Why don't you start talking about the first album and then
Okay. The band was signed,
and we'll keep it loose.
All right. The band was signed to Columbia Records, and Jack Douglas took an immediate interest in this band and was behind the production of this first album. And there are many tunes on this first album that, if you were a fan of kind of catchy, or as we say, power pop music of that era, it could have been hits. The first release they had was called Silver and Gold, which is a little bit different than the rest of the content of the album. It's more of a mid-tempo tune, and it's not sung by their usual lead vocalist. It's this Gary Cox. He wrote the tune, and that's the song they chose from the album to release as the first single. Didn't go anywhere.
It's a ballad. This track, if anybody, I don't know if you know it, we're trying to turn you on to stuff, kind of reminds me of a McCartney ballad, maybe in the late 60s, early 70s. and sprinkle a little bit of Brian Wilson on top.
Oh, it's
Um,
beautiful. It's
it
a
does have,
beautiful mid-tempo ballady
yeah,
pop tune.
got Beatle
Ah,
backgrounds,
ah,
but then again, it does still sound very 70s.
that it does.
It
That it
should have
does.
been bigger than it was.
I know. How many times then we discuss bands, we have that lament. How in the world did this miss? And it's like I said, the music industry is such a crapshoot. Um, Talent alone is not going to do it. It's chance, luck, serendipitous things happening during your career that allow you to have legs in this business. They put out another single, was called Think. And this is more the Artful Dodger sound. This is a power pop tune. Again, why was this not a hit? If the Raspberries had hits and Rod Stewart had hits with similar content in that era, how did Artful Dodger miss the mark? Columbia Records was behind them. It wasn't like they were on some tiny label or some cheap label that wasn't backing them. They wanted, when Jack Douglas got behind a band in that era, people took note. So they did have the machine behind them, but who knows? And I'm sure the band members to this day are confused as to how they didn't make it with this treasure trove of material, in my opinion.
Yeah, you mentioned that track. When I listen to this, it sounds total Raspberries. It sounds like heavier Raspberries.
It does.
Not the Eric Carmen ballad, but more of the, harder edge of the Raspberries.
Yeah, it's more the Wally Bryson side of the Raspberries. Like I say, Raspberries mixed with the Faces, grittier than the Raspberries, but that attention to songcraft where it's catchy, great riffs, great vocals, all the things that you would want in this genre of music. Artful Dodger had it. Two more songs off that first album, Wayside and Follow Me. Why not a top 40 hit? I don't understand, but
Wayside got that acoustic opening. Intricate Paul McCartney style bass lines in it. It is full blown power pop, overdriven guitars, catchy melodies. Reminds me of, okay, if you we mentioned the Raspberries before, but think about some of those great power pop Raspberries tracks, and that's what you've got. What was the other song you mentioned? You mentioned Follow Me. Power chords. All right, think about this. Go back in time. Think about the Who 1966, 67 with Pete Townsend and those power chords. Very similar to mid-60s Who. Very power pop, catchy melodies, catchy verses. The chorus, we always mention it always checks my boxes. It checks every box.
And this is why we've taken up the mantle, because we had a few people that are part of the Warehaus crew that have been clamoring for us to take a look at this catalog. I think Ken White and T. Rocker in particular, they're Northeast Ohio guys. They know what I'm talking about. They probably lived it, even though they're probably not as old as me. They probably experienced it on. Well, no, this is a given.
No, Ken might be as old as you.
But I mean, they know what kind of fan base this group had. And I think both those guys have been badgering us to look at this catalog and give these guys some love, because they certainly do deserve it. Unfortunately, you're going to have to dig a little bit to find any of these releases out there in the wild, but they are out there. Maybe take a road trip to Northeast Ohio and go to some used record shops. Fate might smile on you, but it will be worth your while if you like this kind of music. This is the best of the best. You like the Raspberries, you like the vibe of the Faces with a nod is as good as a wink to a blind horse, that era of the group. You will love Artful Dodger.
Yeah,
so I think Go ahead, Grant.
Well, DC, I think that this is probably the best album of the lot.
I agree.
We were talking a
Yes,
little bit before the show that I think that there's just nitpicking between the records. This one, I think, of course, look, you have your whole life to write this first album.
exactly.
You've heard that whole story before with these
Yeah.
bands. This is a good example of that. The sequencing's perfect. The songwriting's perfect. The production's great from Jack Douglas. I really have nothing. The only one thing that I come up with that I might even think could be filler would be the song New York City, which is kind of an acoustic little ditty. Reminds me of something maybe the Kinks might have done. Is it filler? It sounds very British.
Oh, I love that tune,
this.
Grant.
Okay.
It's such a neat curveball to come in there in the in this collection of songs. And yes, it is very different. In fact, it starts with an acoustic guitar and a rainstorm, a gentle rainstorm, but it's a toe tapper and it's a throwback tune. And like you say, it's like one of those Kinks dance hall tunes that the Brits are so famous for, McCartney loves. It's a nice little segue on here among all these tunes.
Fine.
But it's just like, we like to get into the nitty gritty on this stuff, folks, but
I mean, it's
all good.
That's the only thing that I could nitpick about
Yeah.
because it doesn't fit with the flow of the record, but it's also at the end of side, it's also at the end of side 2. So does it really matter at that
Yeah,
point?
folks.
Not really. But I will go say that if you're going to start out with any of them, well, actually, you could start out with any of them if you can find them, or if you have that box set that DC just showed you, that's got all the Capitol, all the Columbia stuff. But this, I think, is the best album. The next album, I might as well go on to the next album.
Yeah,
The next
let's do
album
it.
Came out in
76.
76, Honor of Thieves. Now, this CD got a couple of different CD releases. Real Gone put one out, and I think there's a Columbia CD that came out. Evidently, this record probably sold more than any of the other Artful Dodger
Releases.
catalog, I guess, I'm assuming, but it couldn't have sold that much because it's still pretty obscure.
Yeah.
But when I listened to this, came out in 1976, you still have Jack Douglas, I do think's producing, but we have a new producer.
I can't think of the guy's name, but I think he's a Paisan as well as the lead singer of the group.
Yeah, but you still got the same lineup as before.
You do. And I think the band lamented a little bit with the second release because Jack Douglas oversaw the album, but wasn't as hands-on as he was with their debut.
Mhm.
And the guy that he kind of handed the ball off on to kind of coordinate all of this was not Jack Douglas. It didn't bring the little attention to detail and the ideas that Jack did. I read in the booklet that comes with that CD set, the band members lament the fact that the guy did a fine job. It sounds great.
Yeah.
But the things that Jack added to that first album weren't ideas that this second guy was bouncing off the band. So that was like their one little caveat about, not quite what the first one was.
Well, plus it does sound a little bit different. It basically picks off where the first album left off, but this album rocks harder. It's not as quote unquote power pop. Call it power pop adjacent, but it rocks a little bit more. Yes, there are quote unquote power pop moments on this, but it's a little bit harder record. But I think what they do here, it all works out. It sounds more like harder version of Raspberries, like the song you ought to like, Wayside. Well, no, not Wayside. Wrong record, Grant. Honor of Thieves. It picks up right where the debut left off. It's kind of like when I listen to this record, it's kind of like Cheap Trick meets Stars meets the Raspberries. It's just more straight rock and roll, but I do hear Stars on here too. So
yeah, it definitely rocks harder. And the one single from here is called "Scream," and it starts out as a ballad, but then comes becomes a mid-tempo rocker. But the other tracks on here rock harder than that single. So I do agree with you, Grant. It's not quite as power poppy as the debut, but still there's some great songs here. I don't rate it as highly as the debut, but it is definitely worth having in your collection. It's a good album.
It's just nitpicking pretty much. But you mentioned screams. It's got orchestration, acoustic guitars, very raspberry sounding, and it's got very Beatlesque melodies on it.
Mm-hmm.
So if you like the Beatles, you like the Raspberries, you're probably going to like it. I did make a note. The track "Keep a Rockin'." It's pretty heavy rock and roll, and this is where I really hear Ian Lloyd as a vocalist.
Mm-hmm.
No one knows Ian Lloyd, but if you go, he did several solo albums. He did backgrounds for the Foreigner records. Look at those Stories albums that had Ian singing.
Brother Louie, and also Mammy Blue. If you remember Mammy Blue, it didn't chart as much as the first hit, but that's a good tune too. That's Ian Lloyd on vocals.
Another track, Keep Me Happy. More catchy, pure power pop goodness. Sugary, sweet power pop. It's great. And remember, I made a note, essential. It is an essential track, very Raspberries likes. But yes, this album's heavier, but it still has a lot of that power pop like that's on the first album, which the first album is pretty much all power pop.
Right. And I'll note on one song that you didn't mention, a tune called Hey Boys, I put a little notation. There is a nice little lead guitar trade-off between the two guitarists, which is a little different. I mean, there's some nice lead work here. I mean, you're not going to get Joe Satriani. That's not what you want here. But there's a nice lead guitar trade-off on this tune between the two guitarists.
Yeah, so, Heavy Boys, fairly heavy, wouldn't you say?
Mm-hmm.
And when you listen to this, I hear it and it sounds very British to me. I would say it sounds like if anybody knows the band Shoes out of Illinois, Zahn, Illinois, it's very much like the Shoes, and you sprinkle a little bit of Small Faces on top. That's kind of how I see it. That's how I see it.
Yeah, I think we've captured the vibe of this band if you're not listening to them, and we're trying to pick other sources that you may be familiar with to try and get you to wrap your head around what this band's all about.
Yeah.
So I guess that brings us to album number 3. And like I said, this was a 3-album deal with Columbia. 1977 brings us Babes on Broadway, which has got really the lousiest cover art. Let me see if I can.
It doesn't, of course, I'll have the cover art here when we're talking about it. Ladies and gentlemen, look at this cover art. It doesn't scream, please.
Yeah, you want to buy that album? Is that a rockin' experience for you with this little street urchin? I mean, I guess he's representing the Artful Dodger.
That's the Artful Dodger.
Literary fame. But I think that's just some royalty-free art that they slapped on there. And it looks more like a soundtrack album than a rock and roll release, as they say.
Mm-hmm.
The band came back strong with this third album. This is my second favorite of the 4.
Mine too.
The single, Can't Stop Pretending, I put notations and stars in my notes. How did this especially miss being a hit? Good Lord, this has got all the great stuff of that first album, and I was talking about 4 songs that should have been hits. This is the one of their catalog that's the biggest head scratcher for me. What a great tune. And if Marlon's listening, Marlon even's got some horns on it.
That may cause Marlon to melt.
He may not like that at all. He was going to check them out until I mentioned that.
Can't Stop Pretending. You got that 12-string jangle. Now, you know what band this reminds me of? You're probably going to be surprised.
Hit me.
It sounds like Slade. Noddy Holder type of vocal. It sounds like a pop
Slady tune.
Slade kind of track from one of back in the day.
Which they got into about that period, Slade was doing stuff with pianos and
Yeah.
mixing it up a bit. And boy, that's a real gem of thought there.
That's
That
what
didn't
I
even
heard.
occur to
That's what
me.
I hear. And Slade did nothing in the States at this time. It wasn't until Quiet Riot in the early
Oh,
80s till Slade did anything. Yeah, they were Slade hit songs, but Slade didn't have a hit.
the band busted their ass in the States, just playing gig after gig, traveling all over the place in shitty buses and whatnot. They just could not break in the States. And a lot of those glam type bands just didn't translate from the British scene to the United States. And maybe that's why these fellas just couldn't make any headway to, for whatever reason.
Well,
I don't understand it, because to my ears, yeah, I love this stuff, but maybe I'm just really in the minority. I don't know.
well,
Not in Northeast Ohio, but overall.
Well, good thing you mentioned that. All we're trying to do here in the Warehouse is turn you on to stuff. Artful Dodger's pretty obscure. If you like power pop, you like, Cheap Trick, you like Small Faces, Ian Lloyd, Badfinger. I hear some Badfinger. We're going to get to that.
Mm-hmm.
I hear a lot of Badfinger, Raspberries. You might like this band.
This is the value of the Warehouse and the content we put out there. It's varied. Hats off to Grant. Tackle a lot of different types of music and bands, some obscure, some very well known. But the value is, listen to our descriptions of this stuff. If it's in your alley, then check it out. There's a song here. It's called "Who in the World," and it sounds like a long lost Bee Gees track.
Or
Saturday Night Fever, that era of Bee Gees.
This is what I hear. See if
Okay.
I'm crazy or not. Of course, this is a very acoustic type of track.
Mm-hmm.
This sounds very much like Robin Zander or John Lennon doing the vocals. Excellent. It's very British. It sounds to me like a Badfinger song. A Badfinger song with either Robin Zander doing his John Lennon or John Lennon singing. It's just very British. This band, for being a band from the States, really sounds like a British band to me.
Yeah, they were. There's definite influence there. For me, I hear like "Gotta Get a Message to You," Bee Gees type vibe, and so there's another song I wanted to bring up just because it's of its time. It's kind of funny. There's a song on here called "The Idi Amin Stomp." The legendary cannibal prime minister, or when he was president of Idi Amin, not beloved by anyone, but it's just funny they picked it's a stomper, as they say, and it's a rocker. And
yeah, but you could look at that though, DC. It's kind of funky. It kind of reminds me of Grand Funk, to be honest.
Oh yeah, it's a bit definitely a foot stomper. There you go.
But it ends side 2, and then after that you got an Eddie Cochran.
Come on, everybody.
Which reminds me of Slade again. Now, when you look at this, is this filler? Well,
it could be.
It could be.
It's a good tune for these guys to cover. I will take. Have you ever heard the Humble Pie version of "Come On Everybody" from Smokin'? Oh, it's good.
God. If I've heard it's been years.
It's my favorite cover of that tune. But I'm sure, you got these. This is 3 albums in a row, 3 years in a row, plus these guys touring, trying to make it. And I don't think we realize it a lot of times these days, how those bands in the 70s, not only one album, a lot of these acts were putting out 2 albums a year plus touring. So the material, you better have a few guys, more than one guy in the band cranking out the material, or you're gonna have half an album of covers. But I think that's what happened here.
We could look at Idi Amin and "Come On Everybody" as filler, but if it's filler, it's damn good.
Yeah, it fits right in. These aren't the tunes that they were they obviously didn't lead the album off with, and they weren't picked for singles or not even under consideration for probably B-sides.
And and like DC, I'm just nitpicking. I have to
Yes, sir.
nitpick about something.
Oh, yeah,
I
we got
don't
it.
have a problem with those tracks.
No, me
But
neither.
when we're looking at the other records, I don't know. Is it filler? I don't know. Let us know in the chat if you know about this. If not, if you love it, let us know. We want to hear about
But
it.
it is my second favorite of the 4 releases. So
It is mine too.
So now we move on, and the band takes a little bit of a break. Some of the guys did a few different things, but it wasn't a big break.
No.
Come back in 1980 on the Areola America Records with Rave On. And the single from this album was called A Girl, La La La. And it is very good, and it is very Rod Stewart. And this is the one that charted in Australia. Go figure. These guys couldn't make any headway here in the States. Somehow this tune makes its way to Australia and charts.
And the funny thing is, DC, is that is buried. Well, it's not so much buried, I guess, but it's on side 2, second song from the end.
And
But
was it some disc jockey that had that album, that Rave On album, just cross his desk in the wilds of Australia? What we got here? And then pops it in there and says, I fancy this La 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 song. Mm-hmm. The rest is history. So
I do want to say this when I'm looking at this record. Now, we're in the 80s, okay? Now, I look at this, and when let me pick out a track. She's Just a Baby opens up the album. If you know the band The Smithereens or The Romantics, because we're talking early 80s, it's not much different from that. So if you like The Smithereens, you like The Romantics, you like that power pop, this is in that vein. The second album, It's a Lie, you've got jangle guitars. Another one on the lineup is Get in Line, but it's brilliant power pop.
It's a cowbell rocker. You get a little cowbell there, folks. And She's Just My Baby that leads off the album that Grant referenced with the Smithereens. You get some harmonica on there, which does give it that Smithereens flavor. So Afraid, again, very Rod Stewart-y ballad. This album here has more references to the material Rod Stewart was doing at the time than I think the other 3. But you can draw lines to, all the aforementioned influences. But this one, I think, has the most Rod Stewart kind of treatment to the tunes and the vocals. I think they were really going for that.
Well, maybe, but they were on such a small label, I can't imagine it would do anything. Because if you think about the Babes on Broadway, I've read some reviews and they thought that this was a lot more polished, a lot more commercial. Me personally, when I listened to it and that third and the fourth album, Rave On, I don't really hear that. It just seems like a lot of these 4 records all could be, there's just
juggled.
They could be juggled.
I agree. I don't hear a great difference here from the other 3, other than some of the instruments that they use. Like I mentioned, the harmonica. There's a cowbell rocker, which they never ventured down that road in the first 3 albums. It's got a little bit of a different flavor here, but it's not so very different from their first 3 releases. And you got to figure over time things change a bit, but I don't see any drastic change in this band or its general approach. It's Artful Dodger.
It sounds great, but it's funny because it was a small label. And I just want to note that this came out in 1980. This peaked at 209 on the charts. It was a blip. In fact, I've never seen this record I'm sure this went straight to the cutout bins. No one cared at this point. You would think with Cheap Trick around this time period, because we're talking Cheap Trick all shook up 1980, wouldn't you think that this would do something? I
Well,
don't
Grant,
understand.
I'll
None of
tell
it
you,
makes sense.
I was still in Northeast Ohio at the time, and I had no idea they had released this album. So that just tells you. I mean, I've always been a big fan of music, and I love this band. I heard nothing about a new Artful Dodger release. So there you go. But
Yeah.
somehow one copy found its way to Australia, and it got some footing there. So what a crazy business.
Yeah, it's pretty obscure. But, when I listen to it, it's not much different than the other records. I mean, if you happen to see this out on the wild, I would get it if it was a decent price. Production's fine. It sounds like Artful Dodger. I do want to mention that they had that break, 3-year break, but they also added a keyboard player, Peter Bonita, to the lineup. So he kind of expands it some, gives the band a little bit more breathing room. I think
If
it's great.
if you will, he was there, Craig Frost. It's a nice addition because you do hear the keys coming a little bit more. There's a little bit of keys on a few tunes earlier, but more prominent here. They're utilizing him in a way that isn't like the first 3 albums. So I guess we could point out that distinction. And how about, my shirt kind of makes its way there. How about that, folks? Look at that great Sardini t-shirt.
Sardini.
Available at the Grants Rock Warehouse.
Yeah, get a shirt.
Or a mug. Wouldn't you love Sardini to be looking at you as you have your morning coffee? Wouldn't that be a brightener start your day?
He is. He's the mascot.
Yeah.
So anyway. So Rave On. Actually, how would you rank these albums?
I go debut, Babes on Broadway. I'm going to go with the second album and then Rave On as the fourth. Okay. But there's not a big, the first and the third album I put a little higher. The second album and their final album I would put just below it.
I'm going to do this. I'd go with Artful Dodger, and I'm just going to use the rating 10 out of 10 because obviously that's the album. But there's not that much difference between all albums. Like we said, then I go Babes on Broadway. I'd probably give it a 8.5, maybe a 9. Maybe I'll give it a 9.
Yeah.
And then I would go with Honor Among Thieves, and I would probably, God, it's nitpicking. Let's just give it an 8.5. And then I would probably go Rave On. Well, God, do I really want to do that? No. I'm not even going to do the rating thing. I'm going to go Artful Dodger. I'm going to go Babes on Broadway, Rave On, because I love Rave On. I think it's very refreshing. We're in that era of the knack. Why was this not huge?
God. If we only had the answers to some of these bands that we've touted that are complete head scratchers. I mean, we've done Wondermints, we've done the Posies. Yeah. I mean, that's just for me.
Right.
And it astounds me at what gets through and rises to the top and what just gets discarded and isn't given a second thought. So, I mean, go figure the music biz.
I'm just going to leave it at that. I think all these records are good. If you like the Raspberries, you like mid-60s Who, you like the Faces, you like the Beatles, you like, I don't know.
We're giving you all the reference points, folks. And you can draw a correlation to what this band produced of those influences. If it's in your wheelhouse and you're out and about going through the bins, and if you're probably better off if you went to Fairfax, Virginia, or Northeast Ohio. Probably. I don't know if you're going to find one anywhere else, but well worth your time.
Yeah. Photomaker. I could keep going. I think definitely the first album.
Photomaker.
Man, that's not far off from the Raspberries.
No, not at all. In fact, you had Wally Bryson from the Raspberries who was with Photomaker. A couple of the Rascals.
Yep. So if you like that type of stuff, I think you'll like this. Check it out. Let us know in the comments what your thoughts are on Artful Dodger. And if you have anything, or if you know anything, or if you think you're going to, hey, you might want to check it out.
Yeah, if you've got any fun facts, send them our way. Put them in the comments. We'd love to hear it.
So we can wrap this dog up. We've went damn near an hour talking Artful Dodger. DC, do you have anything you want to mention real quick, or?
No, other than our merch in the stores. We also have a "Let's Wrap This Dog Up" t-shirt featuring a cartoon version of Grant. And we're not, along with the Sardini. Hey, holiday season's coming up, folks. How about Nana just sitting there Christmas morning, rocking away, looking at the tree in her Sardini t-shirt?
She would like
oh, wouldn't that be a holiday memory for the ages?
And we should mention this also. DC and I, by the time this will already premiere. DC and I just wrapped up episode 15 in our Grand Funk series, the final episode, interview with Mark Farner. So if you haven't checked it out, check it out.
It's a good one, folks, because Grant and I strived to not bore Mark with the same questions he got. Interview after interview after interview. We went the extra mile. It is fun. It is engaging. My brain was ready to explode because I've been waiting for that moment since a youngster in 1970 when I heard that first live album. Yeah. So this is like DC's miracle. Come to Jesus moment. It was a Dear Diary moment. It was the culmination of all this enjoyment and love for this guy and his music with Grand Funk and as a solo artist, culminating in me actually meeting him through the interweb and interviewing him. But it's a good interview, folks. If you like Mark, you like Grand Funk Railroad, you like Grant and me, it's well worth your time.
Check it out. So anyway, hopefully you can get turned on to Artful Dodger. I don't know. Please like, subscribe, leave a comment. I don't know what else to say. Check out the Mark Farner series. DC will be back. What's next? I don't know. We're planning on doing like a bubblegum rock show
series.
A series with Stephen SCHNEE. Look for that down the road.
Yeah, you folks were wondering, where do we go now that we've finished up the Grand Funk catalog? We're going to bubblegum. Bubblegum, folks. Where else are you going to get this kind of content? Nowhere else. And Grant, do you want to mention anything about the upcoming listening party with Buckeye-centric artists?
Oh, yeah.
That's coming up too, folks.
The date in front of me, but DC.
I think it's like November 17th or something.
We will be back, and we will be doing a listening party in the Warehaus Sunday night at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. And DC will be back, and we will be doing all Ohio-based music. So they could be solo artists, they could be bands. It's going to be 2 hours of Ohio-based bands. Who are we playing? You'll just have to tune in and find out. Yeah, on that note, DC, thanks. We'll see everybody.
Right, Grant.
Leave a comment. You know what to do.
That's right.
Keep it clean. And let's wrap this dog up. We'll see you.
See you, folks.